Hi, it's Annette. Welcome to Fat Girls Coping. I'm super excited to be chatting with Tatiana Lee. She is an activist, and I will let her introduce herself and let you know what she's working on and who she's working to help. Hi, Tatiana.
Hi, Annette. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I would love to have you just introduce yourself to the viewers.
So my name is Tatyana Lee. I am an actor, model, influencer, and also advocate for disability inclusion. I myself am a person with a disability. I was born with a birth defect called spina bifida. And when I was born paralyzed from the waist down, which resulted in a lot of different complications from learning disabilities to not being able to function my bowel and bladder on my own, and so many other things as a result of my spina bifida, and which has led me into a lot of my activism work.
That's fantastic. I think a mutual friend of ours introduced us via Facebook, but I feel like ever since I've been following you and I've interviewed you for, magazines and stuff, I've been learning so much about the work that you do as an activist. Can you kind of explain that a little bit more?
Well, I specifically, so I'll kind of give you a backstory. So since I was 7 years old, I always wanted to model. I organized photo shoots in my front yard as a 7-year-old. Can you say I'm destined? But when I got to be older and wanting to pursue a career, and then I later wanted to do acting because I loved watching film and I loved watching TV. I was just engulfed with just media as a kid. That's what you do. You consume media and TV and magazines, but watching it, I didn't see myself. I didn't see anyone that looked remotely like me. I rarely saw women of color. Definitely not Black women. I think the only thing I had that was great representation for me was like Brandy and Aaliyah and Monica. Like, you literally had to be a singer. But that was kind of it. And then Tyra Banks came along, and I was so inspired by Tyra Banks, but I still didn't see a woman with a disability. And so that shaped how I viewed myself and how society treated me. I was very much picked on in school. My school had low expectations of me. At 10th grade, my school counselor and a whole bunch of group of people told me my best option was to drop out of school because they didn't know how to help me because I had a learning disability. This is in a small town in Pennsylvania.
That's ridiculous. First of all, I just had to interrupt you for a second. Apologies, but wow, problematic.
Yeah. So that happened, but I still had a mother that encouraged me to still keep pushing and to do the best that I can. And from there, I got my GED. I went to college. I went to community college, and I majored in business marketing because at this time I still wanted to act and model. And I constantly had people telling me no one would ever want to see a Black girl, a plus size Black girl in a wheelchair on a magazine. Literally people flat out told me that. And people were like, well, you're good at marketing and all that stuff, and you went to school for it. Why don't you do stuff behind the scenes? Why don't you manage somebody? Why don't you work as somebody's publicist? And, some people wanted me to go be a teacher and all these other things. And I was like, no. And because I knew something that was a part of me was missing. And being picked on and people looking at you strange, like, well, what happened to you? I was a kid and had grown people look at me and say, what happened to you? And then people walking up to me and telling me my life must suck, and just very ignorant things. And it's just like, really? And so that's why that representation mattered to me, because I said, well, people see certain things on TV, and once they see it, they enjoy it, they like it, and they understand it. Why can't they understand and appreciate my life experience as a Black disabled woman? And so I knew that that was going to have an impact. Plus, I thought I was pretty. I still think I'm pretty. And I looked in the mirror and I liked what I saw, even though society made it very loud and clear no one would ever want to see the experience of what it was like to live my life. Even though I loved my life, and I felt something was missing in that. And I was like, that something it didn't sit right with me. And so I had to pursue a career. And so I left Pennsylvania and I moved to LA, and I wanted to break into the entertainment industry. I wanted to act, I wanted to model, I wanted to do it all. I still do. And when I got here, I realized I thought no one with a disability just didn't want to be in the entertainment industry. I thought, oh, maybe there just isn't anybody with a disability that wants to act. And I was naive, because when I got here, I found a whole community of people that are actors with disabilities that have been trying to break into the industry for years, but there's literal gatekeepers and you literally cannot get in. It's still very hard. And what happened was, when I moved to LA, one of the things that you learn is it's not about what you know, but it's about who you know. That is a very true statement. And so I would go to networking events and parties and different things like that. I just wanted to show up and just be in the room so that I could talk to people and just be my normal, charismatic, just bubbly self. And I knew that I would make connections. But when I would get to these events, they were not wheelchair accessible. I literally could not get in the room. And so that was a huge problem. And I said, oh, it's not that people with disabilities don't want to be in the industry, and that, I was like, they literally cannot get into the room. And so I started blogging about it. I created a platform called Accessible Hollywood. And it was just me writing about my journey, and I would go to events and talk about if it was accessible and, if it was accommodating, what I enjoyed as a wheelchair user. If it wasn't accessible, what I didn't like and what my experience was like, and ways that place could do better and things like that. Just giving casual critique and just sharing from my perspective, which I also did with an accompanying YouTube page, also called Accessible Hollywood. And I just wanted to open people's eyes to the fact that people with disabilities were literally being left out of the conversation, figuratively and actually physically. And it brought about a lot of opportunities, but then I saw a need. And so that leads to the question of you asking about what led to my activism. The activism was the lack of representation and people not like myself not getting opportunities. And so I needed to use my voice. As loud as it is, I had to use it to say something. And that's what set me out on this journey. And I never, ever thought I would ever consider or call myself an activist, but I just wanted to come to LA and honestly just live my best life as a famous actress, a model, being on the cover of magazines and all of that. And I was just like, it wasn't going to be that easy.
Man, thank you for telling us that story. That's amazing. And I know that you kind of collaborate and work with other organizations like throughout the country. And can you also tell us like what you do for work? Because I think even what you do for work is part of your activism.
Yeah, so everything in my life is activism. And I feel like as a plus size disabled Black woman, like just you showing up in the world is activism, honestly. But I do partner with a lot of different organizations. I belong to Curatable, which is a blog that is about the intersection of disability and fashion. It was started by an amazing woman named Stephanie Thomas. She is a disability fashion stylist. She has an amazing TED Talk about how, what makes fashion inclusive to people with disabilities, because Right now, the fashion industry is starting to catch on, but for years, the fashion industry never thought about making clothes for people with disabilities. And if you think about it, if you stand up, um, clothes are made for people that are standing all the time. Clothes aren't made for people who are sitting down and made to look still flattering as you're sitting down, or for a little person, and so much more. And so she has a disability fashion styling system, and she has an amazing TED Talk. I really highly suggest you watch it. You can understand the concept of disability fashion a little bit better. So I work with her, and so she has a platform called Curatable, and she has a group of curators. And so we kind of just share our knowledge and our life experience of what it means to be an influencer with a disability that also loves fashion. So I'm one of her curators. And so that's just sharing my everyday knowledge of what it is being an actress and a model with a disability, and what that's like for me, and how fashion and plays a part in that, on how I feel, makes me feel good about myself, how people perceive me, and how that plays a huge factor, especially with the fact that usually when in the past, when you did see fashion that was for people with disabilities, and even still to this day, it's very medical. And she brings it from a model of the social model, where people with disabilities are fully integrated into the rest of society, because we have been marginalized for far too long. In this day of 2020, people with disabilities are still segregated from the rest of the world. We are put in our own separate box instead of being included into everything. And people with disabilities, we make up 20% of the population. We intersect into everything. We intersect into the fat community. We intersect into the LGBTQ community. We intersect into the Asian, white, Black, Latina, Latinx, all those different populations, trans community. Well, I said LGBTQ, but we intersect in every community. So we should not be left out of every conversation, but historically we have been. So I work with Curatable, and this ends up being a lot of my work. So all my stuff is activism. I also dance with a company called Infinite Flow. We do inclusive dance. I dance hip hop and ballroom. Through them, we hosted an event earlier today. Actually, both Curatable and Infinite Flow together did an event we had today called Uplift, where we got to talk with myself and a whole bunch of other Black disabled content creators. And it was a really, really great panel to talk about our work, because a lot of times our work is overshadowed from either non-disabled people or people with disabilities who are not of color. And so every turn we're blocked or overshadowed by some other group and always left out, very much the Black disabled community. And so we did a great event. And so, yeah, I danced with Infinite Flow. And then for my day job, I work with an organization called Respectability. We are a advocacy nonprofit that we advocate for disability, and I specifically work in their communications department, working on Hollywood inclusion. And it's to fix some of the issues that we have of how society views disability. And so what I do is I train studios. So say if Netflix or ABC Disney or some of the studios call and, they have these diversity trainings. So I go in and train them about disability. So I talk about everything from the stats on disability, how much least likely we are to have a job, how much least likely we are to not graduate from high school. Actually, what happened to me of dropping out of high school and not finishing college is very common within people with disabilities, and even more prevalent with people with disabilities who are of color. And so that's a huge issue, because lack of opportunities, lack of people's ideals and perceptions about disability. They think that we aren't educated. They think that we are quote unquote dumb, or have some type of learning disability where we're not able to learn. I have learning disabilities. I have ADHD, I have dyslexia, I have dyscalculia, which they all make my mind functions in a different way that is just different. That's just it. So a lot of my work is having these conversations with people that may not understand, who are typically those gatekeepers, who have the opportunity to hire actors and writers and producers with disabilities, so that we can tell these stories authentically. Because in Hollywood entertainment, 20%, like I said, 20% of the population is people with disabilities. We only make up 2% of what you see in mass media. And not only that, 95% of the time it's done by someone who does not have a disability. So they'll take a large A-list actors. There's actually people who have won Academy Awards for playing people with disabilities. Now, I'm not discounting the work that they've done to get said Academy Award, but it has been at the expense of people with disabilities being the butt of the joke, and also not being included in those conversations. And those ways we are portrayed is very detrimental to the real life experience of people with disabilities, because it gives you the idea that we're not able to work, we're not able to get married and have kids and have a family and be able to get proper health care, and so many other things that just goes wrong, where you need to see the 360 view of what it means to have a disability. A lot of times when you do see films, first, the person does not have a disability, and the whole storyline is them complaining and not wanting to be disabled, or, so distraught about being in a wheelchair and all these other things. My life is not like that. None of my friends with disabilities think like that. They do not wake up in the morning, oh, woe is me, I want to be a non-disabled person and my life is just horrible and somebody save me. Like, that's not real. That's not real. When I get up, I'm like, I'm doing my hair. Is my makeup done before I go out? Is my outfit fly? What movie are we gonna watch? What club are we going to? Like, that guy is cute. He's not. Oh, no, I don't want to date him. The girlfriend that, people call for advice, the businesswoman, the CEO of their own brand, like a businesswoman, a mogul, like a mogul in the making. That is my life experience. Not what they portray on TV and media and things like that. And so that needs to shift. And so that goes into a lot of my work. So I have conversations with these executives about, these are the things that you portray when it comes to disability. There's different terms that we use, like inspiration porn. And it's different stories, like when there's concepts of, it's not seeing the person with a disability as a three-dimensional character, but just there to be heartwarming for you to feel like, oh my gosh, my life is so much better. Like, that's inspiration porn. If you watch a film and the first thing or one of the things that you're thinking is, my life is so good, it's not as bad as that person that was in the film, you're watching inspiration porn. And so we tell people to stay away from that. And then it's like another one called the super crip, where the person is overcoming their disability because they've done something extraordinary. And it's like, oh, look at them, they overcame this and they're not disabled, so I don't see the disability. No, you still see the disability, but they accomplished something. You can have a disability and still accomplish whatever it is you want to do. It's going to be harder, but it's only harder because society puts the barriers on us. And one of the things that I always tell people, having a disability itself is not the hard part. It is not the hard part. The hard part about having a disability is the way society perceives your disability and the way they treat you based on your disability. That's what's the hard part is about having a disability. If people just understood it was a life experience that people just go through and it is what it is, and just make shit accessible, like, the world would be a lot better place and I wouldn't have a need for the work that I'm doing.
Yes, sis. That was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that information. It
No
definitely
problem.
it definitely sets us up for kind of the first talking point in this
Hmm.
conversation. And you kind of mentioned it before, like as a plus size black woman with a disability. And I wanted to kind of get into the whole being black and having a disability, because I feel like that is intersection, as you mentioned. And I hope people can hear you when you say that basically 1 in 4 people are living with a disability. And so, physical or mental, visual or not
Yep.
visual, people with disabilities are a major part of our society. And I think that it's really important that you guys are brought into these conversations, which is one of the reasons why you and I are chatting today. But
Yeah.
the topic that everyone's talking about right now, which I feel like about damn time, is this Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
And as I said in the beginning, I've been following you on social for a while, and I get a lot of information from you and a lot of learning from you. And one of the things you shared was an article about an activist who's actually been planning and attending protests all over the country. And he's a man with a disability, and basically saying that there are people with disabilities that are, executing these protests, leading these marches, attending these protests. And I think that that's something that is not, well known, spoken about, acknowledged.
No.
And so they also
No.
said that, obviously, Black people with disabilities are impacted by this police brutality as well. And the article that you shared said that, like, 2 out of 4 people that have been killed by the police so far have had a disability. So half of the
Yep.
people that have been murdered by police are
Hmm.
our brothers and sisters with disabilities. And so
Yep.
I definitely think that this is so, 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 so important to discuss. And I want to kind of just hear from you on this.
Yes. So just like you said, 50% of the people that are killed or, harassed or by police brutality are Black people with disabilities. Sandra Bland being one of them. She had a disability. And when we say disability, it is based off of the definition of what disability is under the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. That was a law that was put in place that said that people with disabilities needed equal access to everything that the government offered. It's still not living up to that, but we still have a lot more work to do. But this year is the 30th anniversary of the ADA, so that's cool, but we still have a long way to go. But to your point about, yes, people with disabilities are being killed by the police. There's so many different things. For one, lack of communication. If you are a deaf Black man and a police is trying to communicate with you and you can't talk and they don't know sign language, they don't understand what you're saying, they could shoot and kill you. So that happens. I heard a story and I was so upset because it didn't even make the news. And it happened on New Year's Eve. I can't remember his name because I just heard the story from a Black Lives Matter hashtag and someone tagged me in it to see it. And it was a young Black man. He was in a wheelchair and he drove a pickup truck. And he was pulled over by the police, and the police told him to come out with his hands up. He could not come up with his hands up. And his wheelchair was in the trunk, in the back of his pickup truck. Because he did not get out, the police shot up the car 80 something times. He is now dead. They didn't find his wheelchair in the back of the trunk until after he was already dead. So, yes, people with disabilities are very much marginalized. And I think when people think of discrimination, they think of it in one way. Discrimination is based on different stereotypes and misconceptions. So the misconceptions you have about a person with a disability is different than the misconceptions you have about someone being Black. So a lot of people about this movement are saying, well, people with disabilities are discriminated. All of us are. Yes, you are, but you're not as discriminated against as a person who is also Black and disabled, because they deal with the double discrimination. And then me being a woman, it's triple discrimination, because what I'm discriminated against for being a woman is different than what I'm discriminated against for being disabled, and different than what I'm experiencing of being discriminated against for being Black. And I've experienced the intersections of it all. I have been in disability spaces and have been discriminated against based on race. I have been in Black spaces and have been discriminated against based on my disability. And it just is, it's all wrong. And so one of the things that I think about is, as people are doing these protests, think about making your activism accessible. Do you have captions on your content so that people who are deaf can consume your content? Because a lot of people are sharing amazing resources and amazing information and stories that should be told and need to be told, but the people who are deaf can't consume it because you don't have caption. Is the blog article you're writing screen reader accessible so that someone is blind can consume the content? Everybody has an iPhone. First of all, people didn't realize, but text messaging was created for people who are deaf to be able to communicate to each other. So we benefit from things that were made for people with disabilities. And yeah, so now with your phone, there's features on your phone where you can consume content. It will read it for you. It's called screen readers. Most iPhones, Androids have screen readers. So people who are blind can consume your content. So people need to think about those kind of things. And out in public, making your activism accessible. If someone with a disability, make sure the path is accessible so that if I, as a person, as a wheelchair user, want to come out and protest for my life, because my life is more in danger than yours, most likely, make it accessible so I can go out there and scream and holler and represent my community as a Black woman. And then if it's not, also think of ways that it can be accessible even online, because not everybody, especially with COVID, can come outside. People with disabilities, we are at higher risk of COVID. So because of that, you know, making it accessible online. So do things like stream you're out protesting. Share information about what people can do to protest at home. I've been sharing a lot of different information about what people with disabilities who want to be a part of the Black Lives Matter movement, what they can do, and sign petitions. One of the things that I tell them, and I've done myself, is offer up to be an emergency contact to someone that is protesting in case they end up becoming arrested or something like that. Share funds, share any bail funds, you know, share information, share resources, share tips. Talk to white folks, tell them to watch certain films so that they can learn to be allies too. There's so much that you can do right from your home, because I think a lot of people are sending the message that if you're not out protesting, then you're not part of the activism, and that's far from the truth. And actually saying something like that is ableism. So you're saying just because I can't be out there physically that I'm not capable, and that's things that people don't understand that they do that is very ableistic. And ableism is, if you don't know, is the term of discriminatory based on someone's ability or disability. So just like racism, it's ableism. And so saying things like that. So making sure that you are fully inclusive of all demographics is so important, just as much as people, you know, are supportive of LGBTQ and, you know, things like that. And it's like, people with disabilities were always left out of those conversations. And it's just like, I mean, I understand why, but I don't understand why. So.
Thank you for sharing that. And as someone who is learning to be an ally to the disability community, like, one of the takeaways of many that you said that I am going to start practicing is using captions, you know what I mean, in my posts, because that's something that I have been thinking about and wanting to do. And I just need to figure out what the steps are and just do the damn thing. You know what I mean? Like, what's holding me back? I want my stuff to be accessible for everyone.
Yes.
That's part of what I believe in. And so if I have to do a little bit more work to make it happen, I'll do it, you know? And so
Exactly. And
I
that's
think that
all it takes is one
exactly.
person wanting to. Even what I put out is not perfect. I'm working right now on my Accessible Hollywood, my website. It's not accessible right now. There's so much I'm learning every day. So don't feel bad if you make a mistake. At least if you're trying, you know what I mean? That matters enough. The fact that you even thought about it enough to even try. But then there do needs to be some accountability. So don't say, oh, I'm trying, and then don't move forward. You know what I mean? So I'm working on my website. I have a guy that I just called and I said, hey, I need you to work on my website because I need to make sure it's fully accessible. I can't be out here preaching, make things accessible for people with disabilities and make things accessible for wheelchair users, and I'm not being accessible to my brothers and sisters in the disability community that are blind and that are deaf. So I have to hold myself accountable. But back to what you were saying about different resources and things, there are apps, and they're either free or low cost. There's one called Clips. There's another one called Caption something. I started using, it's called, what is it called? Oh, Mixed Captions. I've been using that lately and I really like it. And when I see videos that I think are really good that I'll screenshot it, like screen record the video, and I'll add my own caption so that people can see it, because so many people are putting out information about the Black Lives Matter movement and it is not accessible. So, and that kind of, I want this to be in the front of people's minds, because yes, 50% of those people are someone who is deaf or blind or wheelchair user, and or has some form of mental illness that is, yes, a disability. And so we need to be included in these conversations.
For sure. Like one of the articles that you shared was about, I'm going to read, Neely Latson. I wanted to be able to say his name, who was a Black teen that was arrested in Virginia because he basically fit the description. He was sitting in front of a library to go to like the teen library activities that he would, walk to from home by himself, and it was super a comfortable thing that he was comfortable doing alone as a young Black man with autism living in Virginia. Something happened nearby, and a local person called the police and said that a Black man had been caught, like seen stealing something. Neely fit the description, even though he wasn't in the area. He was, in the town, but not in the area. When the police officer approached him, he didn't really understand what was happening. He got scared and tried to walk away. And then the police officer tried to kind of detain him, and Neely started kind of like pushing him away because he didn't understand what was happening. He kind of just understood that he hadn't done anything wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then he gets arrested, basically, and then he's charged with assault of a police officer. So basically, the thing that he was suspected of and the thing that he was fit the description of, they proved that he hadn't done that, but they still chose to convict this young man of assaulting a police officer, even though he has autism and didn't understand what was going on. They also questioned him without his mother being present. You know what I mean?
Oh
Like
my gosh.
all these civil rights issues.
Yeah.
This man was sentenced to 10 years in prison for this assault of a police officer and ended up spending 2 years in prison. 8 months of that time was spent in isolation. And so,
oh my gosh.
yeah, I,
Yeah.
did some research into the story that you had, shared a
You
link.
dove deeper into it than I did.
Because girl, I be wanting to know, but it's like,
Yeah,
this is crazy.
Yeah, but when you think about it, the police, this is why the police need to be dismantled. They prey on the most vulnerable. And yes, when you are a Black person with a disability, especially an intellectual disability, or any form of disability, actually, because it's just communication barriers. different disabilities have different ways of communicating and different ways of responding to the world. And if you are Black and you just quote unquote fit a description, they are going to mess with you. And he was in a vulnerable situation, and that is horrible. And we're always the one that are the most vulnerable. And even when you talk about the, you know, mass incarceration and school to prison pipeline, most of the people that are in school going to prison from the school to prison pipeline are Black students with disabilities, because they have things. First of all, they lived in impoverished neighborhoods where they don't have resources. That happened to me, where I lived in a neighborhood that didn't have a lot of money, and I was a Black girl, and they didn't want to help me. So therefore I had to drop out. So think about if you are a 10th grade year old dropout, or if you are in school and you have ADHD and no one is helping you cope with your ADHD, or you have on the spectrum of autism and no one knows how to work with your autism, you're going to act out. You're going to act out in school because your needs are not being met. And the school can't meet your needs because they can't afford to meet your needs. And then next thing you know, you're acting out in school, and then they don't send you to the principal and just say, go home for the day and cool off. Who do they call? The police. And then next thing you know, situations like that are happening. And then now they're a part of the system.
And the issue with the police is the same issue with the education system, is they don't have the tools, they don't have the education to be able to help people with disabilities. Like, police aren't giving the training to be able to look at, like, this man that you shared in his truck with his wheelchair in the trunk. They don't have the training to be able to assess that situation properly and then to de-escalate it. Because time and time again, we're seeing these situations that could have been de-escalated end in murder, especially for Black people. Exactly. So it's frustrating to hear that the same issues that you were having in the education system, it follows you into the real world as an adult, because, you know, the correctional system, you know, the justice system is the same way. You know what I mean? It's not built to be able to help and to assist the people that need more help or need more assistance. Like you said, having a learning disability doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. It just means that you learn differently. Things need to be explained differently. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And, like, you know, I do understand that asking that of the police when they don't have that training might be a lot to ask, but this is why people are wanting to defund these police organizations and put those funds into mental health organizations and other counselors and other people who might be able to
early intervention for a lot of these kids. Some of these kids, they just had so much trauma in their life and just need coping skills. They need therapy, so many different things, resources and creative outlets and so many other things. And it's just like, we wouldn't be in these situations. So yes, the police need to be defunded to put money into that. Think about if that kid, if someone was looking for somebody and he just so happened to fit a description and was in the area. Imagine if he would have just came up against somebody who knew him because they were a part of the community and said, hey, where'd you just come from? And the person already knew his name and said, hey, where are you going? They would have known that he was not threatening, that this is something he does every day and he is just minding his business. And you shouldn't assume just because he's Black and fit a description that he's automatically a suspect. But if we had people that were in the community that is doing this work, that is a part of the community, we could avoid so many of these tragic stories. And it's a lot, and it's just been exhausting, and it's exhausting.
So true. And, like, even now, Neely has been released. You know, he served his time in prison, which was obviously, in my opinion, ridiculous. But the article that you shared was more of like an up-to-date article where his mom was kind of talking about years later, he still is afraid to walk on his own. You
I
know,
would be
like,
too. I would
yeah.
be too. I would be definitely afraid to go anywhere. I
And it's
I
so
wouldn't trust
frustrating.
anybody, even after hearing that story that I told you about the guy getting shot up in the chair. And I was like, I usually think just because I'm a woman, like nobody's gonna mess with me. But it's like, no, there's stories of women that are, you know, that happening too. I'm definitely afraid of the police because I'm like, having my wheelchair or not doesn't make a difference of you wanting to attack me.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's just really frustrating. And the fact that, you know, this man, he was at this point just 18, was living his life and feeling super independent. And now, you know, I think it's maybe 10 years later from when all that drama happened, he's in a
Yeah.
space where he is less independent because of the brutality he's experienced from the police. And I think that that's similar situation. It's just like for him, it was like going to the library while Black. And here it is with Ahmaud Arbery running while Black, or Breonna Taylor, you know, sleeping in her house
Leaving the
while
house
Black.
while Black.
You know what I mean? So it's like all these mundane experiences, like walking to the library or jogging around your neighborhood, could be a death sentence for a Black person, could be a death sentence for a Black person with a disability, for the fact that we're profiled, number one, and second, for the fact that, like, these police officers aren't educated enough to be able to de-escalate these like interactions, and then
Yeah.
also not educated enough to be able to deal correctly with people that have disabilities and that might need
Mm-hmm.
more time and attention.
Yep.
Something else that you kind of brought my attention to, which was super helpful, and I think that it's really important in these conversations, because I'm coming to you as someone who wants to learn more about disability activism. Something I said to you was like, oh, able-bodied people, this and this and that. And you correct me and you said, actually, it's not disabled. So can
Yeah.
you explain that to me a little bit? Because I think it's super important that when you want to be an ally to a community, when people in that community are trying to educate you, it's important to listen, to not get defensive, and to ask questions. And so I mislabeled something. You kindly corrected me. And so I want to kind of share that education with other people watching right now.
Yes. So, like you said able body, and the term to use is non-disabled. And for a couple different reasons. One is, like I said, disability is the only group that intersects into everything. It also is the only demographic that anyone can join at any given time. You can fall out of a window. You don't fall out a window and become Black, but you can fall out a window and become part of the disability community. You can be shot. You can be anything. There's so many things. So disability can come from age. As you age, you acquire disabilities. Illness, you can get some kind of illness. We're going to have a whole group of people that are going to be a part of the disability community now after contracting COVID, because there's going to be people that are going to have continuing complications. That is a part of the disability community. And also, or an accident. Anybody can have any accident at any given moment. And so it's not a matter of who's going to have a disability, it's a matter of when. Everyone is going to join the disability community at some point. So just right now, you're non-disabled. Plus, the other point about that, it's a smack in the face to people with disabilities. It's another ableistic term to say able body, because that implies that because I have a disability, my body is not able. And that is not true. My body is very much able. I do a lot of things. I act, I model, I dance. I push my own wheelchair. I cook, I clean, I do so many things. My body is able. My body is just able in a different way than someone who does not have a disability. And people always want to say terms like special needs and things like that. First of all, I do not like that term, because when you think about it, everyone has a special need. It's just certain things that are more visible or less appealing to society, so people want to put labels on it. I hope we get to a point where we don't have to put labels on anything. But And we do need accommodations. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, we're supposed to have accommodations to have equal access, and we don't fully, but it's getting there. And I lost my train of thought. What was the...
Well, no, you were explaining the non-disabled instead of able body. What about the term differently abled? I've heard people say that as well.
Okay,
nope,
so I wouldn't say differently abled.
Tell me, I need to know.
I wouldn't say differently abled either. So one, like I said, everyone has special needs. Everyone is different and needs some form of accommodations. So needing an accommodation just for you to be able to live your life, there's nothing wrong with that. And that's all a disability is. Number two, differently abled. I do not like that term for a few reasons, but the main reason is when the Civil Rights Act was passed for Black people to have civil rights, people with disabilities were not included in that. We were not included until the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, which is actually the 30th anniversary this year. So it's only been into play for the past 30 years, and it's still not perfect. There's still a lot of holes and flaws. But with that said, it states that I, as a person with a disability, get equal access to any and everything that the government offers, or anything that society offers that is public, I have access to. And it's not called the Americans Differently Abled Act. It's called the Americans with Disabilities Act. Without that, I have no rights. Actually, I am one of the first generations to benefit from actually being able to go to school. Before the Americans with Disabilities Act, people with disabilities weren't even allowed to get an education. They were not allowed to be in the classroom. They were not allowed to get jobs. They were not allowed to get medical care. They didn't get anything. They were put in institutions and sat there to just rot, and made them eat slop until they died from just whatever things were going on with them. And if you were out in society and weren't in an institution, you were lucky if you had a family that looked out for you and kept you at home. But then also there was a time where, and this was in the, I want to say late 60s, early 70s, there was actually a law, and it was called the Ugly Law. And it was literally just literally illegal for people with disabilities to be outside. You were literally fined. So if I lived and was out and about just having lunch with you in the 60s and the 70s, the police would have came up to me and fined me for just existing. And so that just goes to show you how far we have to go in terms of disability. So because of all of those things, the Americans with Disabilities Act is supposed to give us equal opportunity, even though we still do not get equal opportunity. So because of that, I say that proud and loud. I have a right to be in this room. I have a right for this job. I have a right to have this opportunity. I have a right to have this health care, because it is stated in the Americans with Disabilities Act. And there's nothing wrong with having a disability. Like I said, it is just a life experience that people experience differently. And the only thing that makes it hard is the lack of access, because of society limits it. And so, yeah, like society has to do better to include us and to not have us a part of these conversations, because people think, oh, they just want to be cured. And I feel so bad for them. Well, if you really felt bad, you would make your building accessible. You would make your content accessible. You would hire that person. You would give them a job. You would put them on the front of a modeling campaign. You would show that the representation is important and it matters, to show people with disabilities in a positive light, where they are seen as 360 dimensional people that are capable and worthy of contributing to society. And flat blank period, that's where the problem lies.
I agree with you 1,000%. And we're gonna continue now, but I'm gonna split this in half because I still have more questions to ask you. But one of the things, just to kind of wrap up this portion of the interview, one of the things that kind of stood out for me is the ADA, that, you know, from what you were just saying before. And I know for me, I recently, a few months ago, watched on Netflix Crip Camp, and that was super educational for me. Like, I had heard about that protest. You had told me about it. I had watched the Drunk Hollywood or Drunk History.
Drunk History, yes.
So I watched that episode of Drunk History, but the episode of Crip Camp,
504.
that's, I guess, is it a series or it's a movie?
No, it's a documentary movie. Yes.
Yeah.
That the Obamas actually funded. Michelle and Barack Obama funded and really pushed it out and got behind that project for it to happen. And actually the filmmaker that made it, he has spina bifida like me. So I was like really stoked about that. And that was cool. And for the Obamas to get behind that project. So yes, watch Crip Camp. It's really great film and shows you how the disability movement started.
Yeah, I really love that. I felt it was so educational. Are there any other movies? I know you're in entertainment and we're going to talk about more of that in the second part, but just to wrap this part up, are there any other movies or shows that you think might be able to help educate people in this space?
Not that I can think of. Oh, there's one called and that's probably more on the entertainment side, and it has to do with representation, but Cinemability is one, which is another documentary. But no, because you know what? There's not that much out there. And especially not Black and disabled. If I can tell you one piece of content that's out there that's for Black and disabled, watch this film called Give Me Liberty. It actually was picked up for theatrical release. You can stream it now. A good friend of mine named Lolo Spencer, she is the very first Black woman with a disability to have a lead in a major film. And the very first, and it just came out last year. Like, we are just getting to that first. So that's another good one. So you can kind of see what a good representation of what it means to be Black and disabled. That's another good representation for that. Crip Camp, I definitely highly recommend because it will tell you the movement about disability rights and so many awesome things, like how the Black Panthers supported them. Like, that is so cool. Like, that's a mix between how the civil rights of Black people and the civil rights of people with disabilities intertwined. The Black Panthers helped them in their movement, and it's just awesome to hear about that. But yeah, know about your history and how, you know, this sit-in, this protest that was organized by people with disabilities with the help of Black Panthers and some other organizations is the longest sit-in in a building, in a Capitol building in history. Still to this day, no one has held a longer sit-in until that happened for Section 504 and the passing of the ADA.
And I obviously love that part, but I also love the part that it kind of all started at a summer camp. You know what I mean? Like, all these people became friends at a summer camp. And the girl who was kind of like the manager or kind of like the lead person at the summer camp was also the lead person behind the ADA, the 504.
Judy Heumann. And that's another thing I suggest. Read up on Judy Heumann. She is like our Rosa Parks of like the disability rights movement. So read up on her. She actually has a new book out. I think it's called The Human Perspective. And I think her last name is spelled Heumann. And I know she's been interviewed by Trevor Noah a couple of times. So check out some of her interviews and stuff that she's done. Like, she is like the disability movement, disability rights movement's Rosa Parks. She has done so much. She's amazing. I actually had the honor of meeting her last year, which was so cool. I was like fangirling, like something serious. And she's just so sweet and so awesome and still such a firecracker and like fighting till this day. And I'm like, I hope when I get to be like that old, like in my 70s, still fighting, and hopefully I don't have to fight this long. That's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping I'm still not talking about these same things 30, 40 years from now. I hope not, but if that's the case, I'm gonna still keep doing it.
Exactly, right? It's like, we gonna see, but we're here for the long haul. Well,
Yes.
well, thank you so much. I am going to wrap this one up and then we'll get to talking about COVID-19 and representation. So
Okay.
again, thank you, Tatiana. Can you tell our viewers where they can find you, where they can follow you?
Yes, you can follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at MSTATILEE. That's Miss Tati Lee. So you can check me out there. And then you can also check out my blog, accessiblehollywood.com. And yeah, hit me up, follow my journey, see what I'm up to and what I'm working on. Just advocating for disability, advocating for Black Lives Matter. And just how it all intersects and how it all relates. So if you want to see that, always tune in. I'm happy to have you join the fam.
Yay, it's such a good fam. I'm super happy to be a part of it. Thank you so much for educating me and our audience. And I can't wait to chat with you more about this.
I can too. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.